Hello, my name is Mike Booth. This is OMBE Probability Statistics. For Elizabethtown, Probability Statistics is a good intro course for a college level student to get them ready for statistics. It's a good way to get a little bit ahead when you go take that freshman statistics course. It's a lot of the basic terms, basic calculations, not as much detailed as an upper level statistics course, but it'll give you a great foundation to be ahead of a lot of students. So we're going to start going through these lessons. Chapter 1 is looking at distributions. And a lot of it is the basic terms. Okay? The basic terms that you're going to need to know throughout the rest of the course. Okay? We do have a lot of distributions. We're going to look at histograms, bar graphs, dot plots, and see what's happening with the data. Okay? Section 1.1, data and variables. Okay? Now the first thing we should even talk about here before we even get into some of the basic terms is what is the science of statistics? Okay? The definition I have here, a collection of methods for planning experiments, obtaining data, and then organizing, summarizing, presenting, analyzing, interpreting, and drawing conclusions based on data. Okay? Basically what statistics is, you have a question, let's find some answers to that question that will point us in the direction we should move forward. Okay? A lot of times statistics do not prove, but they are suggestions, they are evidence of what is going to happen. Okay? So basically this is the first step of figuring out a question and thinking about how can we answer that question. So the first section is going to be a lot of basic terms that you need to do when you're doing a study. Okay? So here we're looking at observational units. After you have your research question, your hypothesis, the next thing is your observation units. These are the objects, the people, the animals, the items that you're going to be looking at to collect data. Okay? So people, animals, objects that are included in the study. This is what the object that you're going to be looking at and collecting information about. Now that information you collect is going to be variables. Characteristics of the observation unit that is being measured. A variable has to be something you can measure off of one observational unit. Now, a lot of times that's a difficult part about picking out a variable. Instead of a summary statistic, a variable is just looking at one observational unit. Okay, so I always kind of hold my hand out and say, okay, if I have this one observation unit, this one person, okay, this one person, can I answer that question about that one observation unit? Then it's a variable. If it's saying, okay, I need a bunch of observation units, say to find an average or a proportion, well, that's going to be a summary statistic and not just a single variable. Different types of writing can sometimes be distinguished by the length of the words used. Looking at the words from a Harry Potter book, we open the book at random and record the length of the first 250 words on the page. So there's an example of a study. Okay? We're looking at the types of writing and we're seeing if the length of the words are going to be able to be used to distinguish what type of writing it is. Okay? So our observational unit here is what are we looking at and what single object or thing are we looking at to answer these questions? Well, it's saying down here, the book at random, and we opened the book at random and recorded the length of the first 250 words on the page. So that's the information we need right here. The observational unit is going to be each word or a single word at a time. Yes, we're looking at 250 of them, that would be our sample size, but we're looking at just one word at a time, and the variable about that observational unit would be the length. Okay, so it might be the number of letters, number of syllables, not exactly sure how they're looking at the word, but it's the length of the word. Okay, so there is an example of the picking out the observational unit and the variable about that. Okay, now from that is where we get the data. So the data in this case would be the length of the word, whatever we're recording about it. Numbers or categories recorded for the observational unit. So like I said in that example, it might have been the number of letters or the number of syllables. Okay? Sometimes I might give you a little more detail than others. Just kind of use some common sense. How would they measure that word or length of a word? And variability, the difference of value or category from one observational unit to another observational unit. Sometimes I'm throwing this one in here because I want to talk about variability, how sometimes people think it's a bad thing. If you have large variability, it's a bad sample or a bad study to be looking at. It is what it is. Okay? If every word is a different length, like in the Harry Potter example, it's not a good or bad thing. It's just, it is what it is. The variability is just the measurement that we have. Large variability means everything's spread out. Small variability means things are close together. When you're looking at variability from one observational unit to the next, it's not a good or bad thing. It's information, okay? It's now we know that about it. So it's not good or bad. It just is what it is, okay? Different types of data. Two types of data we're gonna look at. One is quantitative, which is numerical values. Okay, so we'll have a list of numbers. An example would be weight in pounds. Okay, so we're listing that as a person is 150 pounds, 180 pounds, all numerical numbers that we can list out. The other one is categorical. Now, categorical also can be called qualitative data. The reason I like to call it categorical is because quantitative and qualitative are very similar to each other. They look and sound similar to each other, writing them out. So I like to let people use categorical in this case. Categorical data is just being able to fall into one of our categories in gender, favorite color. These are your, it's not a continuous set of information, but you're going to fall in some class or category instead of a list of numbers. Now with categorical data, there's a little extra add-on question. I'm gonna ask if it is binary. Binary is when there are two outcomes, okay? So if we're looking at people being left and right-handed, okay? You're either going to be left or right. I always tell students, let's not overthink these things, okay? I don't wanna say if you can do right with both hands. I'm not worried about that. Just the general left or right-handed. That would be two answers. Are you a smoker? You're either yes or no, okay? We're not looking at anything in between. That would be considered binary. Okay? One other way to measure data, okay, or at least the type of data that we're looking at, is called the level of measurements. Okay? So we're going to look at nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. The nominal and ordinal is a way of separating the categorical data. Interval and ratio is going to be the quantitative data. So nominal, there is no scale and it's categories, okay? So this is basically just labels, okay? One is not better than the other. You can put them in order, say alphabetically, but that order really doesn't have a meaning to it, okay? At least when you're looking at our observational units. So this would be gender, left-hand, right-handed, okay? Those would be considered nominal. If you're looking at right-handed people and left-handed people, there's no difference. You wouldn't say, okay, left-handed people are the low or the high, right-handed people are the low or high. There is no difference, so that's what it means when there is no scale. For ordinal, there is a scale and it's categories. Okay, so again, it's going to be categorical data, but now there is a low and high end. Okay, the measurement, even though there is an order, the measurement in between isn't always going to be the same. Okay, the example would be, let's say you're rating a restaurant, poor, fair, or good. Okay, can you really say how big a difference between poor and fair and good is? Okay, yes, there's a low end and then there's a high end, but the measurement in between, that one's a little iffy. Okay, we can't measure that. For education, GED, high school grad, 2-year college, 4-year college, the measurement in between is not always the same. Okay, yes, you can say 2-year, 4 years, always 2 years in between, but is it 2 years between each set of categories? No, not necessarily. Okay, so this is categorical, but there is a low end and then a high end for how you're being measured. Interval. Now, interval and ratio are going to be the numerical data, the quantitative data. So for interval, quantitative, scale can be measured, but there is no absolute zero. No absolute zero means that the interval, yes, it can get to zero. You can get a value of zero, but it doesn't mean that's the end point or the starting point. Okay, an absolute zero means that is it. There's almost a wall there. So we're looking at no absolute zero. Examples would be SAT scores and temperature. For the SAT scores, okay, if you take that test, you are going to get a score. You will not get a zero. If you take the test, put your name on it, answer some questions, you are going to get a score. Okay, so you cannot get a zero. It cannot reach zero. That would be considered having no absolute zero. For temperature, we can get negative values. Okay, yes, it can be 0 degrees outside. It can fall right on zero, but that doesn't mean it stopped. It could still be negative values. It could be positive values. So there is going on both sides of that. So there is no absolute zero there. Okay, quantitative data, there's a scale, but there's no absolute zero. For ratio, the last one, We have quantitative data, scale can be measured, and there is an absolute zero, meaning there is a starting point. So I say starting point, but there is that point where it has to hit and it can't go any lower value there. My examples are chapter test scores and speed of a car. So chapter test score, my chapter tests are different than the SATs because unfortunately, if you take the chapter test and you get every single answer wrong, there is a chance you get a 0 on that test. Okay, sad and upsetting, I know, but it is reality that it can be a 0. I can't give you negative, but you will get a 0 on it. Speed of a car, if a car is not moving, that car is moving 0 miles per hour. Okay, so that car is going to be stopped there at 0. It can't go negative miles per hour. As soon as it starts moving, if it's forward or reverse, it is going to increase in speed. Okay, so it can't go negative. So that's why these have considered absolute zeros. It can get to that 0, but it can't go past it. Okay? So for these situations, for the levels of measurement, you really have to think about the situation. Okay? Think realistically about the situation. Can how I'm looking at this data, can it actually get to 0 or not? Does the order actually matter or not if it's categorical? Okay, so these are the things you're going to have to think about. So 1.1, these were some of the basic terms that you're going to use throughout the rest of the course. You'll hear observational unit a good amount. You're going to be talking about the variables a good amount. Okay, we'll start adding more detail to those terms, but this is just a good basic start of probability and statistics.